Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Compassion Unscripted podcast. I'm here, Pastor Ryan's here with Pastor Garrett and Pastor Karen in our pastoral study. There's a lot of pastor adjectives there. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for listening. It's been really fun to have these conversations and getting feedback from many of you on just ways we can continue to improve or things to talk about. And as we go through our series on compassion, so we reflect on what it means to be Compassion Church, particularly during this season of our world and that we're in. So also, saw this space as maybe a fun space to talk about some things that didn't quite make it into the sermon, that could kind of flesh out a couple things or maybe provide some practical resources. I think sometimes when we preach, we want to be very prescriptive, like, hey, do this, give this a try, but we also, I think, want to empower the congregation to think intentionally about those things and not just say, here's your 5 next steps to, to this or that. Not that that's a bad way to preach, but we don't try to always do that. So as I reflected, this week on this past Sunday's message, it was like, here's Jesus. Here's the way he's showing compassion. Here's the way he's inviting us to show compassion. And now go and partner with Jesus in showing compassion. But didn't really come up with he didn't suggest any ways. And so one of the things I think we were thinking about today that I wanted to ask you two, we started this list of how to show compassion, the steps of compassion. And the first one is to slow down, because it's difficult to see when we're moving quickly. You read that quote last week in episode 2 of the podcast that, when we're moving fast, we move in fear. Like when we're hurrying, when we're in this quick, distracted state, it can often be difficult to see people that are in need. And so the first step really to being able to see is actually slowing down a little bit, and talked about just some statistics of the amount of information we get inundated with, every day, images, ads, and information. Oh my, it's like the 3, lions and tigers and bears. So how do we slow down in a world that is speeding up? Why would we do that? I think that God moves slower than we do. I think that when we move quickly, we do tend to be more reactive instead of responding. And most of our reactions are self-preservation, the way our brains are wired, and just that self-protection in our limbic system and our feeling brain, and so if we're going to seek to reflect the grace and compassion of Jesus, I think it starts with slowing down in a world that is speeding up. So I'm curious, for folks listening in, like just for you two to maybe talk about what are some slow down practices that you've tried. I think all 3 of us, like we're continually managing our pace. And one of the nice things about doing church together as a team, as a pastoral team doing ministry, is we can kind of help each other with our pace. And we've done this for a while, so you can tell when I'm going too fast, and it's like, hey, Ryan, how you doing? Like, is there something you need to let go of? And just this week, I rescheduled something that was like, when I got to my week, I was like, I'm doing too much. And so I need to reschedule something that, as much as it would be nice to clear off my list, it's more important to do that thing well than it is to just get that thing done. And now I feel like I have space to do some other things that are both important and timely. I have more space to do those things well. So.
Well, and you're an idea person, so you have lots of ideas about things that you can do.
Sure.
But I think part of the beauty of our team is that, we can be like, well, so what will you not be doing if you're going to add that thing into your schedule?
An important question that I don't like, but I appreciate that you ask it.
Yes. But as you're talking, I'm thinking about, well, we're kind of at different stages in life. And so for me, I have more time where I can choose to slow down. I don't always make that choice, but I just have more time because I don't have kids at home anymore. So for a couple weekends in a row, I had grandkids at home, And I just found myself thinking, oh my word. Like, I didn't put on makeup. I didn't make my bed one day. I mean, it was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
How do you, with kids at home,
Sure.
like, how do you carve out that time? And it's going to look really different. For, you're going to have to work out, like, with your spouse. If you have a significant other there, like, what does that even look like? How do you allow for each other to make that time? So I'm looking forward to hearing how you guys do that, because I don't know that I did the best job when I had kids at home, trying to carve out that time. So for me, right now, what I'm trying to do, and I'm not always good at this, is trying to use a paper and pen to write down things instead of my phone. Even though my Bible's on my phone, it's just so easy to click on other things.
Going analog.
And
Yeah.
yes, I'm going to go old school analog. And some days I do, and some days I don't. And so...
Okay. So the phone is a distraction. So
Yes.
the task that you went to do on your phone, like taking notes, you then get distracted on
or
other
just
things.
even
or-
reading. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
it's just so there's
That's
just so
good.
many other things
That's
on
good.
it. So
Totally. Yep.
and I just can go I will go in spurts, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes I'm, you know, I'll use my phone and then I'll be on doing something else. And then other times I am really good and I have my journal. I write down my prayers a lot. And so I will go in spurts with that. Sometimes I don't write for months and sometimes I write. So it's very much a work in progress.
Yeah.
I don't
That's
have an
good,
answer.
though. No, I think those are great. There's just something about writing that's slower than typing. And, you know, you're eliminating some distractions by writing paper. There's no ad that's going to pop up on the piece of paper, you know, or a text message or something like
Right,
that.
right.
So those are great. That's all. I think that's all we're looking for. You know, hopefully as you're listening, you're thinking about, okay, what maybe here's a menu, maybe something you can try to slow down a little bit that would be contextualized for your life. So, Garrett, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's beauty in some of these ancient practices that I think sometimes we can push back against because we feel like they're these legalistic or prescriptive things that we should do. Air quotes again, should do. But the tradition of having these 3 like calls to prayer during a day, I think is a beautiful practice. Intentionally setting time to just stop whatever chaos you're in, whatever schedule you're in, whatever task you're doing, and having that mandated space to be like, okay, I'm pausing from the stuff that I'm doing, from the hurry, and I'm just checking out where I am with God, right? It doesn't have to, I think sometimes we think it has to be these big, elaborate practices, and it can be something as simple as I'm going to take 2 minutes. I'm going to start my day, you know, find a time in the morning. I wake up and I've got kids I have to get to school and breakfast to make and lunches to make. And so it doesn't necessarily happen right, you know, the first thing I do when I wake up. But I'm intentional about trying to find a time in the morning to just say, all right, Lord, like I want to see things the way that you see them today. Can you give me a heart and a mind and eyes to see those things? And on we go. And sometimes it's longer than that, and there are other things that are involved in that time, but sometimes it can be that short. And man, has it been beneficial. When I start my days that way and I create space during the day for just a couple other check-ins, it really does make me slow down.
Good.
And then I think the other thing that Cami and I recognized in the midst of COVID, when, you know, you're just on all the time, we realized that there was importance of getting away from your regular daily schedule routine things, like being able to set that down and create space from that, even if it was just a day or 2 days away from that regular schedule. And what we recognized was even in just a small respite from that time, there's this refreshed spirit that for me, I could, rather than being tunnel vision, the things that are directly ahead of me, my periphery opened up, and it was like the ability to sort of see some things on on the sides that I wouldn't normally see. And I know that it's easy for me to say, get away for a day. I have the privilege of being able to do that. I have a job that pays the bills. I have a family that's willing to help out. And so there are people that could make the argument, well, I just don't have the ability to do that. But I think we all have community, or hopefully we're, trying to find community and a support system that can help us do that. And if you don't, make it a priority, because man, it can be game changing.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
I love that picture of the peripheral vision opening up, because when you go to the eye doctor and they check that, with the little dots, like, can you see these dots? It's almost like you're checking times with God, or it's like, hey, where are the little dots that I'm missing out here? That's really a beautiful picture.
That's good.
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, like some practices that I've tried, like one is walking. Sometimes walking here at the building, like just walking down to the coffee shop and back, or walking around our neighborhood. I took one of our kids on a buddy date a couple weeks ago, and we walked around downtown, and just the things that we saw because we were walking instead of driving, just kind of that physically slowing down, the actual speed. We saw different things. So, obviously we had the time to do something like that. I've tried, there are margins in our days that we often try to fill with some other task or to do. And, maybe we check our voicemails, or we check our emails, or we check our social media, or we check our news, or we check, like, I know sometimes it's like at the end of the day, I realize, well, I checked my email 8 times today. Why did I do that? Like, why did I really need to check my email 8 times? No, I probably, in my particular role, I need to check it probably once in the morning and once in the afternoon, but 8 times, and so it's like I've tried to reduce the amount of time. So when I feel this margin and I'm like, oh, I should check my email, it's like, well, I want to redirect to, actually, I want to take that moment and just be present with God, or just, so embracing the margins and actually being okay with that space, has helped me slow down. I mean, we've talked a lot about Sabbath practice, weekly time to slow down, to let go of work, to trust, to pray and play. We have some resources on our website, evch.org, some Sabbath resources. So certainly would encourage just a regular time each week to be able to remember that we're a human being and not a human doing. So yeah, I think there's daily practices. I think there's weekly practices. Garrett, you described getting away, something that you guys are trying to do on a quarterly basis, and so maybe there's a little menu. There's others. There's lots of other actually ways that you can slow down. And so I would just encourage you, if you're listening, to think about, what is something I can do this week to slow down and see, because I think not only does God want maybe to help us see people in need and be able to help. That's not the only thing. He also wants us just to remember that he's with us, and to remember, the wonderful things he's put in our life. And so the seeing is not just, the slowing down is not just for the purpose of seeing people in need. It's also just for the purpose of seeing and sensing God, in our life. And
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think also the seeing can be just to see another human being. Like, it doesn't even necessarily have to be that person is in need, but sometimes it's just recognizing the humanity in another person. And sometimes we can skip over that, even if we're in too much of a hurry. Yeah. So it may not even be, oh, they have this need, how can I meet that? It's, wait, there's a human being sitting across from me. Let me tune into that and just be present.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, sometimes, Keely and I, it's like, oh, hello, there you are. Like, we've been talking all day, but it's been very much like, you're going here, we're doing this, what are we having for dinner? And then it's like, oh, no, wait, like, you're a human, I'm a human, we have a special relationship. Like, so that's a good reminder. Yeah, any like, I think major questions that you had or conversations you've had with people from our discussions Sunday around, Jesus now, this God in the flesh moving around, and we looked at Mark 6 and Jesus, and the disciples trying to get away to rest and to eat, and so they have some really physical material needs, that he wants to meet, but then when they get there, there's a crowd, and so when Jesus sees the crowd, he has splagnitomai. He has a feeling in his spleen, a spleeny kind of feeling. So if we're building this constellation of words that kind of get at what compassion is, and in Greek we have the oiktirmos, which is this kind of traditional compassion and mercy, and a feeling that then leads to a desire to help. I think is kind of what we're developing in our working definition of compassion. And Jesus, God in the flesh, has this. He has this compassion on these people because they're like sheep without a shepherd. But then he doesn't feed them right away. He feeds them, but in not in a physical way. He teaches them a lot of things. And then, if you read the story, the disciples are like, these people are hungry, send them away. And Jesus is like, you give them something to eat. Mm-hmm. And they're like, Jesus, you're being ridiculous. we don't have enough. And he says, how much do you have? And so just talking about it can be very overwhelming when we think about, responding compassionately to people, because the need is overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And yet what Jesus asks of us is, what do we have? And when we put it in his hands, mm-hmm. it becomes enough, just like the bread and the fish became enough. So anyways, if you weren't here on Sunday, that was the 30-second summary of the sermon. Mm-hmm. I don't know, any questions or issues or things that kind of came out of that? And then I think we can let's take a look at John 11 here in a minute, that we didn't get to on Sunday. But
I think the disciples were just they're very human, and they're a good representation of how we can be. Just send them away.
Right.
You know what? They can take care of themselves. Yeah. They can go somewhere and get some food.
Yeah.
So they're a good representation of what can be our first instinct sometimes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an episode of The Chosen. I think it's in season. I don't remember which season.
I don't know.
Anyways, you Google The Chosen feeding of the 5,000. It's a good scene. They do a really nice job of sticking to the text, but then in between the text, adding some different layers. And I think Jesus in that scene is like, well, I spent all day talking to them, so I should probably figure out a way to feed them. Mm-hmm. And so it just, but the way they visually represent what's happening in the text is, Jesus doesn't just snap his fingers and then everybody has food in front of them. Like, he asked the disciples to gather baskets, to gather food, then to distribute the food. Like, he partners with them in the midst of all of this. And obviously he's the one that does the multiplying. God's the one that does the multiplying. Mm-hmm. God has the resources, but then he puts them back into the hands of the disciples to then feed people. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So, we talked a little bit about John 11 and another story where we see Jesus showing compassion and feeling deeply. And so I think it's just good to continue to talk about this God that we have that feels deeply about things, and that's a really central part of the character of God. Because I think as we get into these next couple weeks, I want to talk a little bit more about compassion fatigue. I want to talk a little bit more about how we experience the limits of our compassion, but to continue to come back to this, why are we compassionate? Well, we're supposed to be compassionate just as our Heavenly Father's compassionate, is what Jesus says in Luke 6. We have a compassionate God. And so we have resources to draw from as people who seek to reflect the grace and compassion of Jesus. But if we need to expand our view of God and see God as this compassionate person. So John 11, I think, it'd be a good example of that. So I don't know if one of you are willing to read, if maybe Karen, you're willing. I think Garrett read last week. So Karen, maybe you're willing to read. And then just for context, again, like Jesus in verse 11 says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. I'm going to go there to wake him up. His disciples replied, well, if he sleeps, he'll get better. And Jesus is like, Lazarus is dead. All right. Okay. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe, but let's go to him. Okay. So Lazarus has died and Jesus knows it. And in John's gospel, Jesus is very godlike. I mean, Jesus is God in all the gospels. The gospels all suggest that Jesus is God. But in John's gospel, like, Jesus he's got a lot of knowledge of things that, that no one else would be able to have knowledge of. He operates on a very high level, like the divinity of Jesus is really emphasized. He's human, he's divine, it's both there. But so what we can see as we go through John 11 is this is God in the flesh. Okay, Jesus knows Lazarus is dead. Let's go to him. So let's have you start, Karen, in verse 32.
Okay. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?
All right, good. Why don't you pause there for a second? So you already emphasized for us, if you're listening, there's a word that gets repeated 4 times, right? In this idea of seeing, right? Mary sees Jesus and falls at his feet and offers this is just, it's beautiful, right? And she's ticked. She's like, Lord, if you'd been here, you could have healed him. And Jesus sees her weeping. He sees the Jews that came along with her also weeping. And then it says he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And so these are fun Greek words. Like, again, these are more like gut words. What's interesting about these is in the original languages, he's angry and agitated. Like, if we're just going to go with a straight, straight translation, like when Jesus sees Mary weeping, when he sees the crowd weeping, he is angry and agitated. And you don't usually see the word angry and Jesus go together in the Gospels. They're not quite sure what to do with that, so they come up with indignant or deeply moved or troubled or stirred, And so, but it's a different. It's not the spleeny kind of feeling. He's angry. And the question is, like, who's he angry at? You have any thoughts about that?
Oh, man. So from 2019 till now, I lost my dad and my sister. And this last week, a good friend of mine lost a brother. And in the midst of sorrow and grief, anger comes up. I mean, we get angry. At least I did, and my friend did. Like, what is the reason for this? What is the point of this? Like, there's this anger response. And at times I feel our communities want to just move to, well, things will be okay. God's in charge. God will heal it, right? Like that. And so people tend to make comments, I think, that are unhelpful because I think we're uncomfortable. I think we're uncomfortable with sitting in a grief space, sitting in a space where there are these feelings that we don't know what to do with. And so it's easier to try to comfort through that, to get on the other side of it, rather than recognizing the benefit, I think, of being in it and what happens as we work through that. And so in this instance, God being God and recognizing that we are in this broken world and we're going to remain here until all things get set right, I think is realizing and helping. If this is God in the flesh and we get to see how God responds, God also says, this is not how I intend it to be. Like, this isn't the way I want things. This is broken. This is imperfect. And so in that space, I want to be in it with you. And in fact, I have the same response that you have and should have. This should be the response. We should be angry. We should be sad. We should come to the place where we say, I don't know what to do with this. And this isn't how it should be. And I think we can too quickly skip by that to try to get to the, okay, but God's got it and things will be healed and things will be fine. There's something important about sitting in that grief.
Absolutely. That's good.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, Garrett. Yeah, this is a story that, you get told a lot if you spend any time in church or in the scriptures, and it's a great story. I mean, Jesus literally raises someone back from the dead. But we often don't slow down in this text to watch what's happening before he does that. And to remember, like you said, like he already knows what he's going to do. And yet he takes the time and feels and is agitated and is angry. And this is God, and so the compassionate response here is not only the healing that's about to take place. When Jesus sees, he's deeply moved and he's troubled, he's agitated, he's angry because he cares about these people and the effect of sin and death in this world. And so, yeah, I mean, you've articulated that so beautifully. I think that we have a God who sits in our grief with us and sits in our pain with us, even though he might know what the outcome's going to be. He doesn't skip over that with platitudes or with just, it'll be fine someday. And Jesus like, no, right now, I'm the resurrection and the life. If you believe in me, you're not going to die. Do you believe this? And Martha in the scene, just a few verses, we're like, I believe. I don't really know what that means. And then they go, and it's like, well, let me show you. It means not only believing that I can set things right, but it also means embracing the feelings of grief and loss and anger that come along with that. So
I love that John also recorded in verse 37, but some of them said, could not he who have opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Such a natural question.
Yeah.
And I think that's a question that people ask. I mean, it's one of the key questions when you're talking with somebody who maybe doesn't follow Jesus. Like, why does God allow these things to happen? That's basically what they're asking. Like, if God is God,
yeah,
couldn't he have changed this?
Yeah.
So I love that that's in here too, because that is a human question that people are asking. Even though Jesus was right there. Jesus was right there with them.
Right.
And they could see him in the flesh in that moment, but they're still saying, wait, couldn't he have done something about this? I just think it's just really a beautiful recording of all the things.
Good. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And what type of miracle do they reference here? If we're keeping with this pattern of seeing and not seeing, what's the miracle? Couldn't he who opened the eyes of the blind? So it's like there's this whole thing behind the thing here about you're about to see the glory of God and the true power of Jesus in this what John's going to call the seventh sign. This is the seventh sign that Jesus was who he said he was. So Karen, maybe pick up then verse 38 in the story and just read through 44.
Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go."
Nice. Okay, so what do you notice then, kind of on theme with some seeing and believing in the glory of God? Like, draw those back out for us.
I have a question.
Great.
Is the deeply moved the same word in 38 as it was before?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Agitated
I
again.
didn't want to take that time to look it up.
Yeah, snorting. He's literally snorting. To snort, he's angry. He's deeply moved. He comes to the tomb and says, "Take it away." And Martha's like, "Hey, just not sure if you know, but he's been in there 4 days."
So it really does emphasize that disgust at the brokenness of the, like, he's in front of a tomb.
I think so.
Yeah, like he's in front of a tomb,
Right.
a grave that's holding a dead person.
Yeah.
And he's really disgusted by that whole thing, that this is the state of affairs.
Yeah, that would be. That's interesting to think about. Like there are other healings that Jesus does out of I don't know if disgust would be quite
Okay.
out of anger and agitation, out of indignant,
If I snort, it's disgust.
out of snorting. Okay, out of snorting. I'd want to look at we're using the English word disgust. I want to look at the original language and see if there's a distinction. But words are slippery. But yes, I think he does. There are like if we see healing as restoration, like the setting of things right again, one of the reasons why God does that is he's indignant at the lack of rightness, the lack of justice.
I was thinking that word, like at the injustice of death.
Right. Yeah. So, again, thinking about reflecting the grace and the compassion of Jesus, like sometimes we respond compassionately because there's a wrong that's been done.
Right.
Like this person has experienced, like we're going to look at the Good Samaritan, parable of the Good Samaritan. Like there's a person that has been robbed and stripped, half dead, left half dead. Like that's wrong. And the Samaritan sees it and has compassion and wants to set it right. And that's very on point for the character of God,
It seems like there's an allusion here, like there's a stone rolled in front of a tomb, right? Where do we see that language coming? Where are we going to end up seeing the glory of God in this same type of a situation, right? In the resurrection of Jesus. So there's definitely this allusion to what is to come. And so it's almost like this juxtaposition of one day all things will be set right. All of these things that cause us anger, that cause us pain will go away. And yet they're still here. And Jesus could have chosen to show up and heal Lazarus, but he didn't. And so it's like death is a real thing. Brokenness is a real thing in this world that we're in right now. One day all things will be set right. That time is not yet. So what do we do in the in-between time? And this, I think, for me is the call to compassion in the already but not yet, right? Like, how do we reflect this glory that we see as Jesus has called his disciples to follow, to learn what it looks like to see God in the flesh, to live in that kingdom world is to be compassionate. So to be able to see people, we referenced this earlier, it's not just see someone in need and meet that need. It's to be present in the things that are happening in the lives of our brothers and sisters and being able to be in that with them and say, what would God's response be? Sometimes it's to meet a need, but sometimes maybe it's just to sit with someone, to be present in whatever it is that's going on with them and not necessarily think we have to fix something.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I think oftentimes the act of compassion is just being with people.
Yep.
But that is time consuming, it's costly, it's complex. And so I wonder, it's like sometimes I want to do something almost to relieve the tension that I'm feeling, and the doing might not actually be what that person needs.
Right.
So that's where, as we talk, it's like, okay, I want to slow, I want to see, I want to feel, and then I need to listen. I need to listen to the Holy Spirit, and then I need to listen to the person. And what do they actually need? Not what do I want to do for them to alleviate the feeling I'm having. Like, what do they need? And if they need someone to just sit and be with them, then I'm willing to do that, and respond in that way. And I think on point with what John is inviting people here to, because the other thing that's coming up is, I'm doing these things so that you might believe. I'm the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? Like, you're responding compassionately in the in-between. Like, you see death and brokenness, and yet you know that someday it'll be put to right because you believe, like, underneath all of the... So I think we have to, at some point, like, the only way we can sustain compassionate living and being compassionate is when we believe that we're reflecting the grace and compassion of Jesus, and that this is the type of God, and someday he's going to put all these things to right, and so this belief that we have underneath it, that Jesus really is God in the flesh walking around. Again, I think we're kind of intentionally not focusing on the main parts of the story that often get focused on, but the seeing, and it is there. And then again, Jesus says, did I not tell you, in verse 40, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So belief often comes before seeing, and it invites us on this journey of, okay, I'm gonna believe that Jesus really is who he says he is. I don't often know what that's gonna look like in my life, but Jesus is like, well, if you believe and you're willing to kind of follow me on this journey, you're gonna see. You're gonna start to see the goodness of and the glory of who I really am. It's there, but the belief accompanies this action and willingness to say, all right, God, I believe. Like, help my unbelief, help me to see. And then it's like, boom, there it is. God will start to show you these different things. So,
as we've talked, this verse has come to my mind a couple different times, so I'd like to share it. It's from 2 Corinthians 5. We're talking about seeing people. It says, so from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Though we once regarded Christ in this way, we do so no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old has gone, the new is here. This is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That's what I think, that when we're talking about seeing people, we are seeing because Christ has given us that ministry of reconciliation, not to us. I mean, we do want to be reconciled with people, but the ministry of reconciliation is the pointing of people to God.
Yeah.
And so showing compassion isn't about making ourselves feel better or doing the right things, but it is about connecting people with Christ,
right,
and what
That's
he has
good.
done for them.
That's
That's just
Yeah, that that reminds me of was it Luke? 18, somewhere around there, that exchange that Jesus has with the Pharisee, where there's like, they're praying, right? And the one is like, thank you for not making me like the murderer or the wicked, right? And there's another person who walks in, I think it's the tax collector, and he's like, thanks for like being merciful to me, a sinner, right? This compassion thing isn't like us being a savior, right? It's not us swooping in and making all things right. It starts with a recognition that we're human too, and we need it just as much as every other human being.
amen.
Yeah. I've covered a lot of ground today. I hope it's been helpful. It's been helpful to me. And yeah, I think I'm so grateful that our value is to reflect the grace and compassion of Jesus. Like, it's just what you said, Karen, and like that we do this because this is who God is, not because it makes us feel better or because, we have to or should or or whatever it is. And that really ultimately, when we talk about being compassionate people, is what's going to sustain us. So yeah. Well, hopefully it's been helpful. We talked a little bit today just about some slow down techniques, some slow down practices, and I would just encourage you maybe today or this week as you're listening to give one of those a try. Try writing things down with a pen and paper. Try taking some moments throughout the day to pause and be with Jesus. Try a Sabbath practice this week. Try a couple hours just where you're not working. Whatever work is for you, don't do it for a couple hours or for a day. And to know that we have a God who I think sees us and sees people. He's still agitated at the brokenness of our world, but is bringing his resurrection power to bear in a lot of different places. And so I think we're excited about where this is going, and picking up the story of the parable of the Good Samaritan this coming Sunday. Yes. And just more conversations around what does compassion actually look like, and why do we sometimes see people in need and walk away, and how could we see them and respond? I think is personally where we want to go this week. So,
all right.
Okay.
Great.
Thanks for joining us, everybody.
All right.
We'll see you around
Next time.